It was just after 7 in the morning when the city was still half asleep. The sky covered with soft gray clouds, and the smell of rain drifted through the air. The hospital parking lot was already filling up with nurses and doctors walking quickly toward the entrance, some clutching their coffee cups, others talking about the long day ahead. Among them was a woman walking with calm steps, holding a small brown folder close to her chest. Her name was Dr. Angela Brooks, though most people didn't know that yet. Angela had worked in many hospitals over the years, but this one, St. Mary's Medical Center, was special. It was where she had trained as a young resident almost 15 years ago. Back then, she was just one of many junior doctors working long shifts and sleeping in on-call rooms that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. But today she was returning not as a trainee, not even as a department head. She was coming back as the chief medical director, the highest-ranking doctor in the entire hospital. It was her first official day in the role, and even though she was confident, there was still a quiet flutter of nerves in her stomach. She wanted the day to go smoothly. She wanted her staff to feel inspired, to know that she wasn't just another administrator in a fancy office. Angela had worked her way up from the bottom, and she believed that leadership meant understanding the people who made the hospital run. Nurses, janitors, technicians, and everyone in between. That morning, she had dressed simply. A dark blue suit, low heels, and no white coat. She didn't like standing out. She preferred to earn respect through her actions. Her short hair was neatly combed back, and she wore a pair of glasses with thin frames. To most, she looked like a well-dressed professional woman. Perhaps someone coming in for a meeting, or maybe a consultant. As she approached the main entrance, she noticed the security gate had been replaced with a new electronic badge system. She smiled to herself, remembering how she'd once fought for better security years ago when she was just a senior doctor. Some things, it seemed, had changed, but what happened next would remind her that not everything had. Standing by the entrance was a nurse, around her late 40s, wearing the pale green uniform of the triage staff. Her ID badge read K. Miller, and her expression was sharp, the kind of look that said she'd seen it all and didn't have time for nonsense. She stood near the door holding a clipboard, her eyes scanning everyone coming in. Angela gave her a polite smile and walked up to the door. But before she could step inside, the nurse extended her arm, blocking the way. "Excuse me," the nurse said firmly. "Staff only beyond this point." Angela stopped, a little taken aback by the tone. "Oh, I work here," she said calmly, her voice soft but clear. "I'm here early for a meeting." The nurse looked her up and down. Her eyes lingered on Angela's suit, her lack of a white coat, her brown skin. She frowned slightly. "You work here?" she repeated, disbelief in her voice. "What department?" Angela could feel the slight chill in her tone, but she didn't want to assume anything. She smiled again, still gentle. "I'll be working with administration," she said, "but I'll also be visiting the wards later today." The nurse's eyebrows rose. "Administration? You mean housekeeping?" The question hit like a quiet slap. Angela's smile didn't falter, but her heart sank a little. "No," she replied, still calm. "I'm part of the leadership team." "Uh-huh," the nurse said slowly, crossing her arms. "We've had people try that before. You'll need to use the visitor's entrance at the side of the building. Staff only through here." For a few seconds, Angela didn't move. She could feel the weight of the nurse's suspicion pressing on her. Around them, a few other staff members walked past, flashing their badges. None of them seemed to notice what was happening. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just an uncomfortable little moment that might have gone unseen by anyone who wasn't living it. Angela considered explaining everything right then and there, but she stopped herself. It wasn't pride. It was patience. She'd learned long ago that sometimes people reveal more about themselves in silence than in speech. "I'm supposed to meet with Dr. Green at 8, she said evenly. "I'm not a visitor. I assure you I belong here." The nurse gave a short laugh under her breath. "Everyone says that." Angela's fingers tightened slightly on her folder. She thought about pulling out her official letter of appointment from the hospital board, proof that she was indeed the new chief medical director. But something in her told her not to. Not yet. She wanted to see how this played out. "May I speak with the charge nurse or someone from administration then?" Angela asked. The nurse sighed loudly as if the request were an inconvenience. "They're busy. Look, ma'am, if you're lost, I can have security guide you to reception." "I'm not lost," Angela said softly. "I think you'll find my name in your morning memo." The nurse looked at her with narrowed eyes, clearly thinking she was being toyed with. "Listen, I don't have time for games," she said sharply. "You need to move aside so actual staff can get in." For the first time, Angela felt a wave of heat rise to her face, not anger, but deep frustration. She had spent over 20 years in medicine, breaking barriers and leading teams with compassion. Yet here she was, being treated like she didn't belong. She looked around the lobby, white walls, polished floors, a faint echo of announcements over the intercom. It was the same hospital she had poured her energy into years ago, but it felt strangely unwelcoming now. "All right," Angela said finally, her voice still calm. "Perhaps I'll just wait here." The nurse muttered something under her breath about people trying to sneak in, and went back to checking her clipboard. Angela stood quietly by the door. She didn't want to make a scene. That wasn't her way. But she did want to remember this moment, how quick people were to judge, how easily respect could be withheld based on appearance alone. A few minutes passed. Staff members continued to walk in and out. Some nodded at the nurse, others at each other, but no one paid attention to the woman waiting patiently near the entrance. Finally, a young intern walked by, someone who had met Angela briefly during her introduction to her the previous week. He froze mid-step when he saw her. "Dr. Brooks," he said, surprised. "You're here early. Did you get your access badge yet?" The nurse's head snapped up. "Wait, Dr. Brooks?" she repeated, her tone suddenly uncertain. Angela gave a small nod, still composed. "Good morning," she said to the intern, grateful for his timing. The intern smiled nervously. "I was just heading upstairs. The meeting room's already being set up for you." Angela turned to the nurse. There was no anger in her expression, only a quiet disappointment. "You see," she said gently, "I did tell you I work here." The nurse's face went pale. Her mouth opened slightly as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She just stepped aside quickly and murmured, I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't realize—" "It's all right," Angela replied softly. "I understand." She stepped past her, walking calmly through the doors she had been denied only moments ago. As she walked through the hall, she could feel a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and something deeper that she couldn't quite name. She wasn't angry at the nurse personally. She knew this moment was about more than one person's behavior. It was about the quiet assumptions that still lived in workplaces, the invisible walls that kept people in certain boxes no matter how hard they worked to step out of them. In her office, Angela placed her folder on the desk and took a deep breath. Through the glass wall, she could see the city stretching out beyond the hospital, a city she had worked hard to serve. She thought about the young doctors and nurses coming up behind her, those who might face the same treatment one day, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew she couldn't change everyone overnight, but she could change how her hospital operated. She could create a place where professionalism meant more than appearance, where compassion came before assumption. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was the same nurse standing hesitantly in the doorway, holding her clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Dr. Brooks," she said quietly, "I just wanted to apologize again. I didn't know." Angela gave her a small, kind smile. "I believe you," she said. "And thank you for saying that." The nurse looked uncomfortable, guilt written all over her face. "It's just, we get so many people trying to come in, and sometimes you have to be firm." "But I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Angela nodded. "I understand your job is hard," she said gently. "But it's also about how we treat people. Everyone deserves to be spoken to with respect, whether they're visitors, patients, or staff." The nurse nodded slowly, eyes glistening just a little. "You're right. I'll do better." Angela extended her hand. "Let's start fresh. I look forward to working with you." The nurse hesitated for a second, then took her hand. "Thank you, Dr. Brooks," she said softly. When she left, Angela sat down at her desk, letting out a long breath. The encounter replayed in her mind, not because she wanted to dwell on it, but because she knew it would stay with her. It was a reminder of why she had accepted this position in the first place. Leadership wasn't about titles or power. It was about setting a tone, about showing others how to behave when nobody's watching. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break. A bit of sunlight streamed through the window, falling across her desk. Angela smiled faintly. The day hadn't started the way she expected. But maybe it had started exactly the way it was meant to. Because sometimes change begins in the smallest, most uncomfortable moments, like being stopped at a door by someone who didn't know who you were. And sometimes, those moments plant the seeds for something much bigger. Angela picked up her phone and called the HR office. "Could you schedule a meeting later this week?" she asked. "I'd like to talk about staff sensitivity training and workplace respect." She ended the call, then leaned back in her chair, looking once more out at the city. The hospital bustled below her. Patients arriving, ambulances unloading, nurses hurrying through corridors. Life continued as it always did, and somewhere downstairs a nurse named Karen Miller stood a little taller, her mind turning over what had just happened. She didn't know it yet, but that brief encounter would stay with her too. Long after the embarrassment had faded, it would change the way she spoke to others, the way she saw the people walking through those doors. For Angela, the day was just beginning. There were meetings to attend, policies to review, and countless challenges ahead. But as she took her first sip of coffee, she felt something settle in her heart, a quiet determination to make sure that no one ever again would be made to feel like they didn't belong in their own workplace. The clock struck 8. Her first meeting was about to begin. She stood up, adjusted her jacket, and walked toward the conference room with her head held high, not out of pride but purpose. Today wasn't just her first day as chief medical director. It was the beginning of a new chapter. For her, for the hospital, and for everyone who believed that dignity and respect should be part of the cure. The morning continued quietly after that awkward moment at the entrance. By 8 o'clock, the hospital was fully awake. Phones rang at the nurses' stations, stretchers rolled down the halls, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with disinfectant filled the air. Dr. Angela Brooks walked through the corridor, her heels making a soft clicking sound on the polished floor. She smiled at the familiar chaos of a hospital morning, patients waiting to be seen, staff rushing between departments, and doctors reading charts on tablets. It was all so familiar, yet it felt new again because now she was responsible for everything that happened under this roof. As she neared the conference room, she noticed a few staff members already inside. Some were chatting quietly, others reviewing papers. The moment she stepped through the door, everyone turned toward her. The room fell silent. For a brief moment, she could sense a mix of curiosity and surprise on their faces. Not everyone had met her yet. "Good morning, everyone," she said with a calm, warm tone. A few responded with polite greetings. The deputy director, Dr. Green, stood up quickly, smiling. "Good morning, Dr. Brooks. Glad you're here. We were just about to start." Angela nodded and took her seat at the head of the long glass table. It felt a little strange sitting there, the place once occupied by her mentor who had retired just 2 weeks earlier. She glanced around the table. There were about 12 people, department heads, nursing supervisors, and senior administrators. Each of them had been in the hospital for years. Dr. Green began the meeting, going over the day's agenda, patient safety, staff shortages, and the new digital record system being installed. Angela listened carefully, occasionally taking notes. But her mind wasn't only on numbers or systems. She was thinking about the people, the faces she had seen that morning, the tension in the nurse's eyes, and the look of surprise when her true role had been revealed. When Dr. Green finished, he turned to her. "Dr. Brooks, would you like to share a few words?" Angela looked around the table again. Some people were leaning forward, clearly interested. Others sat stiffly, unsure of what to expect. She took a slow breath. "Thank you," she began. "I'm honored to be here. Many of you know I trained in this hospital years ago. Back then, I was the one doing night shifts, answering calls at 2 in the morning, and learning what real teamwork means. So when I walked in today, I didn't just feel like a leader. I felt like I was coming home." Her tone was calm but warm. The room seemed to relax a little. "I believe every hospital's strength isn't just in its technology or policies, it's in its people," she continued. "From the doctors and nurses to the janitors who keep our halls clean, every person matters. And I want this hospital to be a place where respect is part of our daily routine, not just a word on a poster." A few people nodded quietly. Angela smiled slightly. "I had a small experience this morning that reminded me why this is so important," she said, choosing her words carefully. "When I arrived, a nurse stopped me at the entrance. She didn't recognize me and assumed I wasn't supposed to be there. I'm not upset about it, she was doing her job, but it reminded me how easily we can judge people before we know their story. The room grew still again. A few people exchanged glances. Dr. Green looked a bit uncomfortable. I'm sharing that, Angela went on, because I want us all to think about how we treat others, whether they're staff, patients, or visitors. A hospital isn't just a building, it's a community, and the way we treat people reflects who we are. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before someone started clapping. It was slow at first, then a few others joined in. The sound wasn't loud, but it was genuine. Angela smiled again, not because of the applause, but because she could feel a small shift in the room, a sense of connection starting to form. After the meeting ended, several people came up to greet her personally. They introduced themselves, some sharing stories about how long they'd worked there. Others seemed shy, unsure how to approach their new boss. Angela shook every hand, listened to every introduction, and made sure to remember at least one thing about each person she met. When the room cleared, Dr. Green stayed behind. That was a good first meeting, he said, looking a little relieved. You handled it well, Angela smiled. Thank you, Thomas, but I think there's a lot of work ahead. I want to understand what's really happening on the ground, what staff are feeling, not just what the reports say. He nodded. I'll arrange some department visits for you this week. Perfect, she said. By mid-morning, Angela was walking through the wards. Everywhere she went, people turned to look. Some recognized her face from the staff announcement email. Others whispered quietly, trying to figure out who she was. She made a point of greeting everyone, from nurses drawing blood to cleaners wiping down counters. In the pediatric wing, she stopped to talk to a young nurse who looked nervous when she saw her coming. Good morning, Angela said kindly. How's your shift going? The nurse blinked, clearly surprised that the new director was talking to her. Good, ma'am. A bit busy, but fine, Angela smiled. That's how it always is, isn't it? Busy never ends in a hospital. The nurse laughed softly, relaxing a little. Angela walked further down the corridor, her eyes landing on the familiar faces of patients and staff. Every interaction, every exchange mattered to her. She wasn't walking around to show authority. She was trying to understand the heartbeat of her hospital. By noon, she had visited 3 departments and spoken with more than 20 staff members. Some were open and friendly, others hesitant. She didn't mind. Trust, she knew, was something you earned slowly. Around lunchtime, she stopped by the cafeteria. It was crowded, noisy, filled with the smell of soup and fresh bread. She picked up a tray, grabbed a sandwich, and found a seat at one of the corner tables. As she sat down, she noticed a few people whispering. She smiled to herself. Word must have spread quickly about what had happened that morning. She didn't look around to confirm it. She just ate quietly, listening to the buzz of conversation around her. Nurses talking about night shifts, a group of interns laughing over something silly, an older doctor discussing patient cases. It was the sound of life, of routine, and she loved it. But just as she was finishing her lunch, someone approached her table. It was the same nurse from that morning. Her posture was stiff, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her ID badge. Dr. Brooks, she said quietly. Angela looked up and gave a gentle nod. Hello again. The nurse hesitated before sitting down across from her. I wanted to apologize again. I've been thinking about it all morning. I feel awful. Angela set her sandwich down. You don't need to feel awful, she said softly. You made a mistake. What matters is how you handle it afterward. The nurse sighed, her face red with embarrassment. It's just, I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. I let my assumptions get in the way. It's no excuse, but we deal with so many people trying to come in without clearance that I've learned to be cautious. Angela nodded, understanding. That's fair. You were doing your job, but sometimes caution can turn into judgment without us even realizing it. The nurse nodded slowly. You're right. I guess I've been doing this for so long that I stopped seeing people as individuals. I just see uniforms, badges, and rules. Angela smiled kindly. It happens to a lot of us. This job is stressful, and sometimes we build walls without noticing. The important thing is learning to take them down again. The nurse looked up, her eyes softening. You're very kind, Dr. Brooks. I expected you to be angry. Angela shook her head. Anger doesn't help anyone. What I want is change. Small, real change that makes this hospital a better place for everyone. For the first time, the nurse smiled too. It was a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," she said. Angela reached for her coffee. "We all deserve one." They sat quietly for a few moments before the nurse stood to leave. "I'll do better," she said sincerely. "I know you will," Angela replied. After the nurse left, Angela stayed in her seat for a while, thinking. She knew that conversation wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. Real change began in moments like that, in one person deciding to see differently. Later that afternoon, she had a meeting with the HR team about staff morale. The report showed that turnover among nurses had increased over the last year. Many cited stress and lack of respect as reasons for leaving. Angela listened carefully. "We can't afford to lose good people," she said. "We need to create a culture where people feel valued." One of the HR officers asked, "What do you suggest?" Angela thought for a moment. "I want to introduce an initiative, a program focused on empathy and communication. Not a boring seminar. Something real, with stories, experiences, and open conversations. We'll call it the human side of healing." The team looked intrigued. "Every week," Angela continued, "we'll have short sessions where staff share experiences, times when they felt unseen, or times when they learned something powerful about kindness. It'll remind us that behind every role, every badge, there's a person." The HR manager nodded slowly. "That's actually a great idea," Angela smiled. "Good, let's start next month. And I'd like the first story to come from me." When the meeting ended, the sun was already starting to set outside. The light through the windows turned golden, painting the hallways in a warm glow. Angela walked slowly toward her office, tired but fulfilled. She thought about how her day had started, with suspicion and doubt, and how it had slowly turned into something meaningful. Sometimes, she realized, life had a strange way of teaching lessons through discomfort. As she reached her office, she saw a small note taped to her door. It was from the nurse. The note read, "Thank you for your patience today. I was wrong to judge before knowing. I learned more from our short talk than from any training I've attended. Welcome to St. Mary's." Angela smiled, folding the note gently and placing it on her desk. She sat down, looking out the window at the city lights flickering on one by one. Hospitals never slept, and neither did the responsibility that came with leading one. But tonight she felt hopeful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new chances to listen, to teach, and to remind everyone that kindness was part of the cure. She turned off her desk lamp, gathered her things, and took one last look at the quiet corridors outside. Somewhere, a nurse was helping a patient, a doctor was checking on a case, and a janitor was mopping the floor. They were all part of one team, and Angela Brooks was determined to make sure they never forgot that. She smiled softly, whispering to herself as she walked out of her office, "We start changing the world one hallway at a time." And with that, she stepped into the elevator, ready for whatever the next day would bring. The following week began with a quiet buzz around the hospital. Everyone seemed to be talking about the new chief medical director. Some said she was strict, others said she was calm and kind, but most agreed on one thing: she was different. Dr. Angela Brooks had made quite an impression, not by demanding attention, but by showing it. She took time to listen. She asked questions that mattered, and she remembered people's names, which in a hospital that large was rare. Word about her human side of healing initiative was spreading fast. Flyers were being put up in staff lounges and hallways. Many thought it was just another leadership program, something that would come and go. But others were curious, especially after hearing about what had happened at the entrance on her first day. Angela wasn't interested in gossip or appearances. She cared about one thing: building trust. She wanted every nurse, doctor, technician, and cleaner to feel seen. To her, a hospital was not just a workplace. It was a family that needed care just as much as the patients they served. On Monday morning, she arrived early again. The same nurse who had stopped her that first day, now noticeably warmer, greeted her with a smile. "Good morning, Dr. Brooks," Angela smiled back. "Good morning. How are things today?" "Busy already," the nurse said, glancing at her chart. "But we're holding up." "Good," Angela replied. "Let me know if you ever need extra help down here. I want to make sure the front desk always has support." The nurse looked surprised. "I will. Thank you." Angela continued walking through the lobby, her heels clicking softly. She liked being there early before the rush fully started. It gave her time to see things most people missed, the small acts of kindness that kept the hospital alive. In the waiting area, she noticed a janitor helping an elderly woman find the right department. In the cafeteria, a cook was quietly setting aside a cup of tea for one of the nurses who always forgot to take breaks. These were the details Angela paid attention to, the little things that never showed up in reports. At 9 o'clock, her first meeting began. It was about budget planning, one of the more stressful parts of her job. Several department heads were gathered around the table, discussing numbers, staffing, and equipment needs. Halfway through the meeting, one of the doctors spoke up. "Dr. Brooks, I appreciate your new initiatives, but honestly, morale isn't our biggest issue. We're short on people. Nurses are burning out. It's hard to keep up with the workload." Angela nodded slowly. "I understand," she said. "You're right, staffing is a major problem. But morale and burnout are connected. People work better when they feel respected and supported." The doctor sighed. "Respect doesn't fill empty shifts, though." "No," Angela agreed, "but it makes the shifts we do have a little easier. If we can improve the culture, people will want to stay, and that helps in the long run." The room went quiet. Some nodded, others stayed skeptical. When the meeting ended, Angela stayed behind for a few minutes, reviewing her notes. She knew change would take time. Hospitals were like ships. It took patience to steer them in a new direction. But she was determined. After lunch, she made her way to the emergency department. It was always the busiest, most unpredictable part of the hospital. The sliding doors opened to the sound of monitors beeping and phones ringing. Nurses moved quickly between patients, and doctors called out instructions. Angela stood near the entrance for a moment, observing the rhythm of it all. A nurse named Olivia noticed her and walked over. "Dr. Brooks, I didn't expect to see you down here," she said, slightly out of breath. "I wanted to check in," Angela said with a smile. "How are things today?" Olivia gave a half laugh. "The usual chaos. We've got 3 trauma cases coming in and 2 beds short." Angela nodded. "Anything I can do to help?" Olivia blinked. "You want to help?" Angela smiled again. "I might not be on call, but I remember how to roll up my sleeves." Within minutes, she was helping move equipment and checking patient charts alongside the nurses. She wasn't doing it for show. She genuinely wanted to understand the challenges they faced firsthand. At one point, a young resident looked at her with wide eyes. "You're the director, right? You don't have to do this." Angela smiled faintly. "Leadership doesn't mean staying behind a desk. It means knowing what your people go through." The resident nodded, clearly impressed. Hours passed quickly. The emergency room buzzed with life and noise, but Angela moved through it all calmly, offering guidance when needed, listening when someone was frustrated, and praising small efforts that often went unnoticed. As the day wore on, something unexpected happened. The atmosphere began to change. People started smiling more, talking more. The tension that usually filled the air seemed lighter, even if only for a short while. By the time Angela finally left the emergency department, the sun was starting to set. She was tired but content. The staff thanked her for stopping by. One of the nurses even said quietly, "It's been years since someone from administration actually helped us on the floor. It means a lot." That comment stayed with her the rest of the evening. The next morning, when she arrived at her office, there was a small envelope waiting on her desk. Inside was a note written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for spending time in the ER yesterday. We all felt seen. You reminded us that leadership can be human. From your night shift team." Angela smiled as she read it. She placed the note beside the one she had received from the front desk nurse. 2 small pieces of paper, but both symbols of progress. Later that day, she met with the communications team to discuss the upcoming human side of healing sessions. "I want this to be real," she said firmly. "No lectures, no fancy presentations, just stories, honest human stories from our staff." The team agreed. They decided to hold the first session in the cafeteria after hours, open to anyone who wanted to attend. When the day arrived, Angela wasn't sure how many people would show up. She expected maybe 20, but by the time she walked into the cafeteria, there were nearly 60 people seated: nurses, doctors, receptionists, janitors, even a few security guards. The room was quiet. Filled with curiosity, Angela stood at the front. "Thank you for coming," she said. I started this because I believe we can't take care of others unless we take care of each other first. Every one of you has a story, a moment that changed how you see your work. Tonight we'll start by sharing a few of them. She looked around the room. I'll go first. She told them about her first day, about being stopped at the entrance and how that moment reminded her that kindness and respect are just as important as skill. She spoke simply without anger, turning what could have been a painful story into a lesson about empathy. When she finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Then a man in a maintenance uniform raised his hand. Can I share something? He asked. Angela nodded. Of course, he stood and spoke softly. Last year my daughter was sick. I missed a few shifts to take care of her. When I came back, one of the nurses left a card on my locker that said, "Family first. We've got you covered." I never forgot that. That's why I still work here. The room murmured quietly. Then another nurse stood up. She shared how a patient once told her she was the first person who made him feel human during his hospital stay. One by one, people began to speak. Stories of kindness, loss, mistakes, and redemption. Some were emotional, others lighthearted. There were tears, but also laughter. Angela listened to every word. And as she looked around the room, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: connection. The walls that usually separated people by role or rank were slowly dissolving. When the session ended, no one wanted to leave right away. Groups stayed behind, talking and sharing even more. Angela stood quietly in the corner, her heart full. She knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. That night, as she drove home, she thought about how simple it had all been. People just needed to be heard. That was all. The next few weeks brought visible change. Staff started greeting each other more. Departments that rarely interacted began collaborating better. The hospital felt a little more alive, a little more human. One afternoon, as Angela was walking through the hallway, she overheard two nurses talking. "Did you hear what she did in the ER?" one said. "She actually helped with patients."
Can you imagine?
"I know," the other replied. "It's like she sees us, really sees us." Angela smiled quietly and kept walking. But just as things seemed to be improving, a sudden incident tested everything she had been working toward. It happened late one evening. A patient had collapsed in the parking lot. Security called for help, and within minutes the emergency team was rushing outside. Angela, who was still in her office finishing paperwork, heard the commotion and went down immediately. Outside, the scene was tense. A man was lying on the ground, unresponsive. A crowd had gathered, and panic was spreading. Angela moved quickly to assist, her voice steady as she gave directions to the nurses and paramedics. The team worked fast, performing CPR and monitoring his vitals. After what felt like forever, the man finally started breathing again. Everyone sighed with relief. As the team prepared to take the patient inside, Angela noticed something. One of the newer nurses was shaking, tears in her eyes. She had frozen during the emergency, unable to act. Angela walked over and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hey," she said softly. "It's okay. You did your best," the nurse's voice trembled. I couldn't move. "I got scared," Angela nodded. "It happens. The first time is always hard. But you were here and that matters." The nurse looked at her with gratitude. "Thank you, Dr. Brooks." Angela smiled faintly. "You're part of the team. We lift each other up, remember?" By the time the ambulance pulled away, the tension had eased. People began to return to their duties, talking quietly about what had just happened. That night, Angela stayed behind long after everyone else had gone home. She sat in her office, staring out at the dark parking lot where it all had happened. She thought about the fear in that young nurse's eyes, and how fragile courage could be until someone believed in you. The next morning, she called a quick meeting. She wanted to make sure everyone who had been part of that incident knew how proud she was of them. "Yesterday," she said, "we faced an unexpected situation, and you all stepped up. You saved a life. That's what teamwork looks like." Then she turned to the young nurse. "And to those who felt scared or unsure, remember, fear doesn't mean failure. It means you care deeply about what you do." The room filled with quiet smiles. For the first time in a long while, people seemed to breathe easier. Angela looked around the room and thought to herself that maybe, just maybe, the hospital was starting to heal from the inside too. The next few weeks at St. Mary's Hospital were some of the most hopeful the staff had experienced in years. The atmosphere had changed. People smiled more, talked more, and seemed to move with a lighter energy. It wasn't perfect. There were still long hours, short tempers, and tough cases, but something was different. There was a sense of belonging that hadn't been there before. Dr. Angela Brooks could feel it every time she walked through the halls. Nurses who once avoided speaking to administrators now stopped her just to say hello. Junior doctors asked for her advice. Even the cafeteria staff greeted her like an old friend. The Human Side of Healing program had become a small but powerful tradition. Every Friday evening, people gathered in the cafeteria to share stories, real, raw, and sometimes emotional. Angela loved those moments. She believed those stories were slowly rebuilding the heart of the hospital. But as things began to improve inside the hospital, a new challenge appeared from the outside, one that would test Angela's patience and leadership more than anything before. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Angela had just finished her coffee and was reviewing reports in her office when her assistant rushed in, holding a tablet. "Dr. Brooks," she said quickly, "you need to see this." Angela looked up. "What is it?" "There's a video circulating online. It's from someone in the waiting area yesterday. They're saying our staff refused to help a patient in distress." Angela frowned. "Refused to help?" Her assistant nodded, biting her lip. "It's not the full story, but it's spreading fast. People are angry." Angela took the tablet and pressed play. The shaky video showed a crowded waiting area. A woman could be heard crying out, saying she needed help for her husband. The video captured a few seconds where no nurse was immediately visible. Then the screen went black. The caption read, "St. Mary's Hospital ignores patients in need." Angela sighed heavily. She knew how quickly stories could be twisted online. What the video didn't show was that the nurses were already attending another emergency and had responded to the woman moments later. But online, context didn't matter, emotion did. Within hours, the video had thousands of shares. People were posting angry comments accusing the hospital of neglect. By noon, local reporters were calling for statements. The hospital's public relations team was scrambling to control the damage. Angela remained calm. She had faced crises before, but she knew this one required more than quick words. It required truth and compassion. She called an emergency meeting with the communications team, department heads, and senior staff. Everyone looked tense as they sat around the table. Angela placed the tablet down. "You've all seen the video," she began. "Before we react, I want to remind everyone, our job is to stay calm and lead with facts, not fear." Dr. Green spoke first. "The video is misleading, but people are furious. Reporters are outside already." Angela nodded. "We'll address them. But first, we'll confirm every detail. Who was on duty at the time?" The head nurse raised her hand. "It was the morning shift." The staff did respond. "The woman's husband was treated immediately afterward. He's fine now." "Good," Angela said. "Then we have nothing to hide." "But people won't believe that easily," another administrator said nervously. "They only see the video." Angela leaned forward. "Then we'll show them the whole story. Not through excuses, but through honesty." That afternoon, Angela personally visited the patient's family. She found the woman sitting by her husband's bed in recovery. The man, pale but awake, smiled faintly when Angela entered. "Mrs. Carter," Angela said softly, "I'm Dr. Brooks, the hospital's director. I heard about what happened yesterday. I wanted to make sure your husband is doing better." The woman looked surprised. "Oh, yes. He's much better now. The nurses were amazing. It all happened so fast." Angela smiled gently. "I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to ask, did you happen to post a video online about what happened?" The woman's eyes widened. "No, someone else filmed it. I was too upset to notice anyone recording." Angela nodded. "I understand. The video caused quite a stir online and it doesn't show the full picture. Would you be willing to speak to the media to help clear things up?" The woman hesitated. "I don't really like attention, but if it helps the staff, yes. They really were wonderful once they got to us." Angela thanked her sincerely. That small act of cooperation gave her hope. Later that day, she stepped outside to face the reporters. Cameras clicked and microphones pointed toward her. The crowd was buzzing with tension. "Dr. Brooks," one reporter called out, "what do you have to say about the viral video accusing your staff of negligence?" Angela stood tall, her voice steady. "What the video shows is a few seconds of confusion in a very busy emergency department. What it doesn't show is that our nurses were already handling another critical case and responded immediately once available. The patient in that video received full treatment and is recovering well, the reporters murmured. But she continued, I've spoken personally with the family, and they've confirmed that our team acted professionally and saved a life. We understand the public's concern, but I want to remind everyone, hospitals are full of real people, doing their best under intense pressure. Sometimes a few seconds feel longer than they are. Her tone was calm, not defensive, and that made a difference. The crowd began to quiet down. One reporter asked, Are you saying there was no wrongdoing? Angela shook her head. I'm saying that our staff acted responsibly, and I stand by them completely. That statement was picked up by the evening news. Some viewers were still skeptical, but many admired her directness. By the next morning, the patient's wife had released a short video of her own, thanking the hospital staff and confirming that they had done everything possible to help her husband. The online anger began to fade, replaced by messages of support. Inside the hospital, staff watched the news with relief. Many felt proud, not just because they had been defended, but because someone finally stood up for them publicly. Later that day, one of the nurses from the emergency department found Angela in the hallway. Dr. Brooks, thank you, she said quietly. You don't know how much that meant to us. Angela smiled. You don't need to thank me. I just told the truth. The nurse shook her head. No one ever defends us like that. Usually when something goes wrong, we get blamed. You stood by us. That's rare. Angela's eyes softened. You deserve to be defended. You save lives every day. As the nurse walked away, Angela felt something shift inside her. The incident had been stressful, but it also showed her what real leadership meant. Not just managing policies, but protecting people when it mattered most. That Friday, during the next Human Side of Healing session, the cafeteria was packed. Everyone wanted to hear Angela speak about what had happened. She stood at the front, microphone in hand, her voice gentle but strong. This week tested us, she began. A short video could have damaged our reputation, but what it really showed was how quick the world is to judge, and how important it is for us to stay grounded in truth. She paused, scanning the room. I want you all to know something. I saw how you handled that crisis. You stayed calm, you worked together, and you saved a life. No video can take that away. The room was silent, but the air was heavy with emotion. Some people were nodding. A few were even wiping their eyes. Angela continued. It's easy to forget that hospitals are made of humans, not machines. We get tired, scared, and overwhelmed. But what matters is that we keep trying. That's what makes this place special. When she finished, the crowd broke into quiet applause. It wasn't the loud, forced kind. It was heartfelt. After the session, people lined up to thank her. Even staff members who rarely showed emotion expressed their gratitude. That night, when Angela finally returned to her office, she sat in silence for a few minutes. The lights of the city flickered outside her window. She thought about the chaos of the past few days, the worry, the frustration, the noise, and how it had all settled into something meaningful. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from the nurse at the entrance, the one who had once refused to let her in. The message was short. You were right, Dr. Brooks. Respect before assumption. Thank you for reminding us again. Angela smiled softly. She remembered how far they had all come since that first day. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone learning to see people differently. Over the next few days, Angela noticed small but powerful changes. Nurses were helping each other more. Doctors were speaking more kindly to staff. Even patients seemed calmer, picking up on the positive energy. One afternoon, as she was walking through the children's ward, a little girl tugged at her sleeve. Are you the boss of the hospital? The girl asked shyly. Angela knelt down with a smile. Something like that. The girl grinned. My nurse says you're really nice. Angela laughed softly. Your nurse is very kind. Are you feeling better? The girl nodded. A little. But the food is yucky, Angela chuckled. I'll see what I can do about that. As she walked away, she felt an odd warmth in her chest. Sometimes the smallest voices reminded you why you started in the first place. That evening, as she left the hospital, she looked up at the building glowing under the night lights. It wasn't just a hospital anymore. It was a symbol of growth, of second chances, of what could happen when people chose understanding over assumption. but deep down she knew her work wasn't finished. There were still challenges ahead. The world outside was quick to criticize, and leadership meant standing in the middle of storms without losing your calm. Angela took a deep breath of the cool evening air. The parking lot was quiet except for the distant hum of an ambulance arriving. She watched it pull up, lights flashing, siren fading into silence. She whispered to herself, "One more life to help. One more chance to lead with heart." Then she smiled, unlocked her car, and drove away, ready for whatever the next day would bring. The morning sunlight spread across the hospital parking lot, glimmering on the glass walls as the city slowly came to life. Inside St. Mary's, the usual hum of activity filled the air. Footsteps echoing down polished corridors, the soft beeping of monitors, the distant chatter of nurses beginning their shifts. But there was something special about this morning. Today marked exactly 6 months since Dr. Angela Brooks took charge as the chief medical director. 6 months since the day she stood outside those same doors, refused entry by someone who didn't realize who she was. 6 months since everything began to change. She stood by her office window, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise cast a golden glow across the building. The hospital looked the same from the outside, strong, quiet, steady. But inside it felt different. It felt alive. There were still challenges, of course. Hospitals never stopped facing problems: staff shortages, patient overload, tight budgets. But the people inside had changed how they handled them. There was more kindness in the way they spoke to each other, more patience in their voices, more humanity in the way they saw one another. Angela took a slow sip of coffee, reflecting on everything that had happened. The viral video incident, the public pressure, the team's courage, it had all tested them. But it had also united them. She turned when she heard a knock on her office door. Her assistant stepped in, holding a clipboard. "Good morning, Dr. Brooks. The community board members are already setting up in the conference room. They're excited about the new initiative." Angela smiled. "Perfect. I'll be there soon." This was the big day, the launch of the Compassion and Inclusion Initiative. It was something Angela had dreamed about since the first day she arrived at St. Mary's. Program designed not just to train medical staff, but to remind them why they joined this profession in the first place: to care. The initiative focused on 3 things: listening, understanding, and respecting everyone, no matter who they were or what they looked like. It wasn't just about patients, it was about staff, families, and even visitors. The idea had grown from that first painful experience at the hospital door. Angela never wanted anyone else, visitor or professional, to be judged before being seen for who they truly were. When she entered the conference room, the space was buzzing with quiet excitement. Board members, nurses, doctors, and even community leaders had gathered. Colorful banners lined the walls, reading "Healing with Humanity." As Angela walked in, everyone turned to her. A few started clapping, and soon the room filled with applause. She felt a flush of warmth rise to her face. "Good morning, everyone," she said as she stepped to the podium. "Thank you all for being here. 6 months ago, we began a journey not just to heal bodies, but to heal trust." The room grew quiet as she spoke. "I've learned something important during my time here," she continued. "People don't just come to hospitals for medicine. They come for hope. And hope doesn't come from machines or charts. It comes from how we treat one another. It comes from being seen, being heard, and being respected." There was a softness in her tone that drew people in. This initiative is about more than training. It's about remembering that every person who walks through our doors carries a story. Sometimes that story is filled with fear or pain. Sometimes it's filled with pride or strength. But whatever it is, our job is to meet it with compassion. She paused, then smiled gently. "And I'm proud to say this hospital is already doing that every single day." The audience erupted in applause again. When the meeting ended, people gathered around to thank her, shake her hand, and share how the program had already inspired small changes. One nurse told her that she had started a peer support circle for new hires. A doctor said he'd begun taking an extra minute to talk with anxious patients instead of rushing through consultations. Every story made Angela's heart swell with pride. Later that afternoon, she visited the cafeteria to grab lunch. To her surprise, she found the once stern nurse, the same one who had refused her entry months ago, sitting at a corner table, helping a young intern fill out paperwork. The nurse looked up and smiled when she saw Angela. It was a genuine warm smile, the kind that said a lot without words. "Dr. Brooks," she said softly. "I was hoping to see you. I just wanted to thank you again for not giving up on me." Angela sat down across from her. "You don't have to thank me. You've done the hard work." The nurse shook her head. "I think about that day all the time. I was so quick to judge. I've learned a lot since then. I even volunteered to lead one of the inclusion workshops next month." Angela's eyes brightened. "That's wonderful news. You'll make a great mentor."